Hello and welcome to another episode of the Gritty Hour. Today I have a very special guest. I have Mr. Ricardo Martinez, who is the author of a brand new book just came out 2 days ago as we're recording called Imagine Listening. Your Worst Day is Our Everyday, which is essentially a book about stories from 911 operators, emergency operators. So welcome to the Gritty Hour, Ricardo.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure you're excited about your new release, and congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a long time coming. So yeah, it's been crazy, but it's been good.
Yeah. So give our listeners just a brief encapsulation of what it's about, the
Yeah.
book.
So Imagine Listening is a compilation of a bunch of IM 911 stories that were submitted back in 2016, and they are still submitted today for the IM 911 movement. This is a movement that I founded for dispatchers to be able to share their stories. It started out to raise awareness for reclassification of 911 dispatchers. However, it quickly turned into peer support, and what we all learned was we were finally had this outlet to be able to feel and let our stories out, put them out there, just a glimpse of some of
Hmm.
those stories. And that's what this book has inside it, is several 142 pages worth of stories. A few of my personal ones are in there as well, but this is book one in a series of books that are going to highlight these stories that were submitted for the movement.
Sweet. So I saw there's a hashtag
Mhm.
IAM911.
Mhm.
Where do people find that generally on Twitter or?
Anywhere on social media, actually, if you
Mhm.
just go ahead and search for hashtag I am 911, you will find all of these stories that were submitted, and probably some stories that I don't even know of that were put out there. A lot of 911 dispatchers from around the world actually were sharing their stories for this movement. And again, it was to raise awareness, but quickly turned into peer support, where also when people were submitting these stories, they were telling me in messages when they were submitting these stories that they no longer felt alone. That was one of the biggest things, is that we felt alone in all of this.
Right. So you were able to develop shared experiences, which helps because it's a very stressful job. Obviously,
Mhm.
everybody knows that. So is there's some, what would you call, a PTSD involved or?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of that is involved in there. One of the biggest things that we deal with is the fact that we don't get any closure.
Mhm.
So, a lot of these calls come in and we jump right to the next one. We don't always get a chance to step away, to decompress. And because we move so quickly to the next call, we also don't have time to end up going to whichever officer or anybody else in public safety, those field officers that went out there to get the whole story. And sometimes if it's an even harder call and there's a debriefing, in a lot of places, dispatch isn't involved.
So you're dispatching,
Mhm.
but you don't know how it ends, is what you're saying.
Right. It
Yeah.
all begins with us. So the call comes in, I could be doing CPR with somebody, EMS gets there, and they're doing textbook CPR, right? As EMS gets there, I hang up the phone and I go to the next call. And
Right.
I don't always know what ends up happening with them, but a lot of those calls, they stick with us.
Yeah. I've always been curious. You get a call more often than not. It's probably a frantic person on the phone because
Mhm.
it's an emergency. Now, how do you technically how do you do it? Like, is it all by computer where you dispatch an officer or a EMT or something while you're talking to the person calling?
Yeah, so the phone call comes in, right? And I'm sitting at my console. I'm sitting at my desk.
Hmm.
I've got about 5 screens in front of me. I have a few keyboards and mice, and I'm looking at everything. Okay, I've got this program where when a call comes in, I start typing in what it is that is going on. I get the location, the phone number, the person's name, and then the main complaint, all of that, whichever incident that it is. Now, during this time, I could be having other emergencies that are going on at the same time. So I could have a call on hold at the moment, because
Wow.
then we start to triage calls.
Hmm.
So let me put it this way. I've got 3 different calls going on, right? One of them comes in and it's an accident with injuries. When that call comes in, I'm typing it in. They are toning out on the other side. So we've got phones on one side, if you can imagine this. So we've got phones on one side, right? We've got two people on main phones. On the other side are the person who's on main radios, and that would be for law enforcement. And then the person next to them is the backup radio and backup phones, but that person's job is also to run licenses, warrant checks, anything like that. Now, at my center, there were three of us during the week that were running the entire county, several agencies, whether it be fire,
Wow.
EMS, or police.
And where was
So,
that, Ricardo? I'm sorry.
yeah, so this was my dispatch career actually started out in Central Florida
Okay.
at a small police department called Frostproof. But after I ended up moving back home to Southwest Michigan to the county that I grew up in. And that's where I finished off my dispatching career. And I knew a lot of people in that area because that's where I grew up. So
Mhm.
this central dispatch was different, where now it's not just me working 8 hours by myself. Now I'm working with a team and
Mhm.
we're working 12-hour shifts. But if somebody calls in, it can quickly turn into a 16 or an 18-hour shift
Wow.
that I'm
Yeah.
working. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got these calls coming in as I'm typing everything out. Again, this is the scenario that we're talking here
Yeah.
is an injury accident. So I'm typing in the information, I'm listening, getting all the information as well. The person who's on main radios can pull up what's called a CAD complaint or computer aided dispatch. And they can read everything that's going on in real time as I'm typing. As soon as I hit enter, it shows up on their side. So then they tone out and say, for example, Allegan Central to East Side units, we have a personal injury accident or PI that is going on at whatever location. And then those that are closest, they end up going. So while
Mhm.
they're doing that, at the same time, I am toning out for EMS and fire to go there as well, while still on the phone with this person.
Right.
I put them on hold if another call comes in, especially if there's nobody else there who can answer the phone. I have to put them on hold. Or since, everyone is headed that way already, and that person that I'm speaking to is safe, and there's someone who just stopped there. If I don't need to keep them on the phone, I can let them go because help is already on the way.
Right.
Now, at that time, another call comes in and it's a domestic. It's an argument that is going on between a couple. So now
Right.
I have them as well as this other one that's coming in. It's verbal. I have them separated. We have people that are going to be headed that way. And then another call comes in and it's a medical. And now I have to do CPR.
Mm.
So these are calls that are coming in, and it's me who's doing this all at one time.
Right.
So now we got a triage. So I've got EMS going for this CPR medical that is going on. I'm still giving the instructions correct. There's a moment there where the caller is doing textbook CPR, where they're doing compressions. They're doing compressions, and I know the number, right, of those compressions that they're going to be doing. So there's a split second there where I can actually put them on hold, which probably sounds weird to people to think, why would you put them on hold? You're doing
Mhm.
CPR. I got to check on that domestic that's going on because anything can happen in 911. Anything can
Sure.
happen in
Mhm.
life, right? So
Mhm.
I take that moment to put them on hold because they're doing compressions, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and EMS is already headed that way. When I pick up the phone for that domestic, now we've got a weapon involved. So, which one do you stick with? The one that's in progress with the weapon, or the one where the person is doing textbook CPR and EMS is already headed that way?
Mm.
So, you're making these split decisions. You're thinking on your feet all the time.
Wow.
So, because EMS is already just about there, you let them know, over the radio, this is what I have going on, and they're already going to be there. So you go with that domestic because there's a weapon involved, and officers are headed that way, and you have to keep them updated as much as possible.
Right.
That's how crazy 911 can be.
It can be. And what if you're like the victim? I don't want to say victim, but say
Mhm.
in that domestic, you have one call with the car accident. The domestic could be the victim, if it, so to speak, and you have to talk to them all while typing and
Right.
as you say, making a judgment on the car
Mhm.
accident. That's it's almost like an air traffic controller, right?
Oh, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
almost because you've got all of these different variables that are going on with each one of these calls. And
Hmm.
again, you're making these decisions. Now, there have been a few times where I have had in a verbal domestic both callers on the line calling.
Mm.
And I've been speaking to, the wife first, and then the husband calls in and someone, yells over to me. I've got the husband on the line and I'll say, okay, put him on hold really quick. I make sure they're separated. Then I talk to the husband because I know the exact situation that's going on.
Hmm.
So now I'm talking to both of them, trying to keep them separated as much as possible until an officer can get there to assist them.
Wow.
And it's just
Eh,
it
do you normally check your blood pressure after that shift, right?
Oh, yes, a lot of times, but also I remember going into the doctor's office because I was having heart palpitations,
Ah,
and I went in there, and I remember my doctor, who been my doctor for my entire life until a few years back, but he ended up saying to me, so your blood pressure is pretty high, and you need to try not to be so stressed, especially at work. And I said, "Do you know what I do for a living? I don't know that I've ever told you." And he goes, "No, I don't know." And I said, "I'm a 911 dispatcher." And he goes, "Ha, oh, okay. Well, I guess you can't really keep the stress down that much, but you
yeah.
got to take care of yourself."
Yeah, I guess a quiet night is a blessing on your job, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you about the hashtag IAM911
Hmm.
and the origins of it and how it grew into be an industry movement, so to speak. And if you don't mind, I'm going to share. Can I share the Amazon pages? And I know the book just
Of
came out,
course.
and I want to give people a glimpse. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, want to give you a glimpse of the book itself, even though it's right behind me. So there's the book, just
Mhm.
brand spanking new. The ink's still wet in there,
Oh, yes.
but you can order it right after you hear this podcast. So tell me about the origins of the hashtag and how it grew into be an industry movement.
So let's go back to 2016. So I've been out of dispatch. Actually, just a few days ago on the 22nd was my 10-year anniversary of my last day in dispatch.
Oh, good for you.
So yeah, I've been out of dispatch. I've been working on the private side really, and doing everything that I do for a living now. So when I left dispatch 2013, I ended up going to work for a company, a 911 solutions company out of Indiana, who actually found me through the podcast that I have, where I'm interviewing dispatchers and they're sharing their stories. They
Yep.
found me through there and they plucked me out of dispatch,
Yeah.
and I
What's the
started
name of
working
that
for them.
podcast? I'm sorry, just so
Uh,
people know.
yeah, the name of the podcast is "Within the Trenches: True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them."
Okay, cool.
Yes. So they found me through there. I was working for them. We go to 2016, and there was this reclassification issue. So dispatchers currently through the Office of Management and Budget, they're seen in the clerical class. So they're in there with clerical workers, commercial dispatchers, and such. And they were trying to fight, some of these 911 organizations were trying to fight in order to get them reclassified into the protective class, which would be with police, fire, EMS, lifeguards, all of that stuff.
Right.
And one of the things both organizations were looking for were stories. Now, I saw that they were gaining some traction, but I wanted to actually jump into this fight that was going on and try to do something different. And what I mean by different is, do it in a way that was kind of in your face, more raw, because that's how dispatch can be. So, what I wanted to do was to simply share a glimpse into one of my calls that I had, turn it into a meme, and hashtag it I am 911. So, the first story that I put out there, I'm in Florida. I was there for a national conference, and it's actually the week after. I'm at my in-laws' house and I'm sitting there and I was thinking and thinking. I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try it. We'll see what happens. And if it doesn't go anywhere, at least I tried. I
Mm-hmm.
never want to have that regret of or what if. So created this meme. It shows a full moon, it's nighttime, and in the middle of it, it says, I heard your last breath the night you flipped your four-wheeler. Hashtag I am 911. And I put it out on the Facebook podcast page of the same name, Within the Trenches podcast. And I asked the followers that were on there, fans of the podcast, to do the same thing. And it exploded. It ended up exploding in a good way, of course. And it got bigger than I ever thought. So when I left my in-laws, I was going to visit my mom, who just lived about 10 minutes away. My son is with me, and my notifications just start going off and going off and going off. And he goes, Dad, what did you do? And I said, I don't know.
You're
I
going
said,
viral as we speak.
right. Yeah. I said, I think I struck a chord is what happened.
Uh-huh.
So, that weekend, people were sending in story after story after story. And I think what really set it off was I told people, if you don't know how to create a meme, just send in the text and I'll do it for you. And that was the issue, in a good way, of course, again, in a good way, because all of these stories just kept coming in
Mm.
through Facebook, through Twitter, all over social media, and on email. And a friend of mine in Canada was saying, we're sharing our stories as well. Keep pushing, keep pushing. And they're 911 as well. But then he sent me another message saying, it looks like it crossed the pond. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, look on Twitter. And it was hashtag I am 999. And they were sharing their stories as well. And there are
Wow.
a few stories in the book too that I put in there, from the UK. And then there were stories out of Australia for I am 000.
Mm-hmm.
And those stories were coming in too. So since 2016, I've been sharing these stories as fast as they come in. I've been sharing them, and there were so many that were coming in. I ended up bringing in people to help me as like an admin team to put all of these out there, because as soon as we would post up one story, about 10 more would come in. Now,
Wow.
again, this is August of 2016 when this happened, and I'm still answering or putting out stories, even with the new ones that are coming in. There are several that I have to put out this week, but still putting out stories from September of 2016.
Wow.
And that's how big it got. Also
Mm-hmm.
to the point where local media was picking it up. I mean, if you Google hashtag I am 911 news stories, there are some news stories out there that were put out where local media was going to dispatch centers and saying, what do you think about this reclassification issue? What do you think about these stories? And I never thought anything like that would ever happen, but it was a good thing because people were finally talking about all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that I do, it started from my own struggle in dispatch,
Mm-hmm.
and sharing stories and all. And once I started the podcast and had other dispatchers coming on to share their stories, it was all therapeutic. And these stories that are in this book is a big eye opener to what it is that we deal with on a daily basis. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. There are some good stories in there as well, but the majority of them can be horrifying. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of those stories, they stick with us. For example, page number 7 in this book is one of my personal stories. And when my grandmother passed away, I was the one who took that call.
Oh my.
So I have that story in there. That's just one of my stories throughout my entire public safety career.
Mm-hmm.
But that is where hashtag I am 911 came from. And
Mm-hmm.
Imagine Listening ended up actually coming from a it's a session that I do, which is basically a peer support session. So I go to different conferences, and I created this session called Imagine Listening because what I wanted to do was to have a live audience. These are podcast episodes as well that I have on there where dispatchers are in this room. No names are given or anything, it's all anonymous. And they share their personal stories. And they either do it through audio or they write them down and I read them for them in the episode, because
Mm.
I wanted the stories to get out there even more, because the podcast was picking up traction.
Right.
And people continue to ask, is this ever going to be a book? I would love to have this book to be able to give to my family or my friends so that when they say, what's the craziest call you've ever taken? I can hand them this book and say, read through some of these stories.
Mm.
and you'll understand more of what it is that we go through and what we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Um, the the book itself, as I said at the beginning, just came out. We're recording this on the 26th of July. Just came out on the 24th of July. Is it available anywhere else besides Amazon? I'm on the Amazon page now.
Yes. So
Yeah.
it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Walmart, Target, any of the retailers. You can get the book there. It's also available on Amazon as an ebook. So you would just click the story before that one, the one that's next to the one where it looks like someone is holding their hands. And so it's in the top right. Yes, that one right there. So that's the story that I was just telling you. That's mine.
Wow. Can I read
So,
it?
of
Can I?
course,
Can I?
yes, yes,
You were with me from the beginning, Grandma. 27 years later, I took the 911 call when you died. How fitting to be there for me in the beginning, and I was there for you in the end. I miss you, Grandma. Can you expound on that call already a little more, or is it?
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So this is 2007, and my grandmother was we knew she was close to passing. She's in hospice care. She was living with my aunt at the time, and I was in dispatch, and it was about 3:30 in the morning, and I'm getting goosebumps now just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I was sitting on backup phones and backup radios, so I wasn't going to be the one taking these main phone calls that were coming in.
Right.
And my partner, who is sitting on phones, she says, "Hey, Ricardo, I'm going to go to the break room really quick to get something. Is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah, of course, go ahead." And I said, "There's nothing going on anyway," which is kind of tempting fate there, right? Something,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost like a jinx. Like I was just asking for something to happen.
Yeah.
And as soon as the door shut, the phone rings and the hair on the back of my neck stood, and it just felt different. And I never hesitate to pick up a phone call. I would always pick it up right away. But for some reason, this one felt different. And that phone system that the center had at the time was an older phone system. So if you think a half a ring or half a second, that's how long it would take for that information to show up on the main screen. So I waited that half a ring, and I saw on the screen pop up the phone number, and it was my mom's cell phone number.
Wow.
So I pick up the phone and I say, "Allegan 911, where's your emergency?" And I hear my cousin, and she says, "Richie?" And because that's how my family calls me, but she goes, "Richie?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Grandma just died." And all I could think was, what are the odds
Yeah.
that I would be the one to take that call? Now, thinking about all of this years later, and after, a few discussions with other people and others saying, that was actually a blessing. I had never seen it that way before. But the reason I wrote it this way too is because my grandmother had been living with my parents since before my siblings and I were born. So she was literally there when I was born. So in the end, which makes it pretty poetic, when she passed away, I was there for her.
Hmm. I appreciate you sharing that.
Of
That's
course.
it, it's unbelievable, really. Can't just the coincidence, or the fact that your associate just left the room is what makes it more. I don't want to
Right.
say eerie, but it's you know. So yeah. So is this the kind of stories that are in here? I guess and
Yes.
they come from all over the world, really, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, they
Yeah.
they they come from everywhere, and people were holding these in, and you know, also there were folks who were sending in stories, which are in this book as well, from the other side, their own version of an I am 911 story, which is
Hmm.
basically like a because you answered type thing. And some of these stories that are in here, callers have submitted their stories as well to say, if it wasn't for this dispatcher, I may have committed suicide tonight. Thank you. These are
Wow.
stories where people were saying thank you, and I had to have them in there
Hmm.
because they're a big part of this. That's something that we don't always hear, is that thank you. And I want to mention as well that the reason I put this or had people share these stories in this form, I am 911 form, is because to me this is almost like another form of communication. So, for example, the first one, the original one that I put out there, the people that I spoke to, I'm never going to meet them face to face, right?
Hmm.
But if they were ever to read that story, or maybe someone who had a similar incident, if they were ever to read that story, they would know that they were not alone, because it's almost as another form of communication, is me reaching out to them saying, I was the one who was there. I was the one who heard your last breath, or I was there with you during whichever time that this was. And you stick with me, and I still think about you.
Hmm.
That's why I did it that way.
Yeah, yeah. It's also it can be rewarding.
Mhm.
I would imagine you may have had a couple of calls like that where someone is thinking about taking their own life, as an example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, if I may, I do have a story, just like that, where I took a phone call once where a lady had called in, and she was dealing with a lot of neck and back pain. And it was so excruciating that she was calling in to tell me that she no longer wanted to live.
Wow.
She wanted to kill herself. And I'm talking with her. I've got help on the way already, but I'm trying to keep her mind off of what it was that she originally called for. So I had a trainer once, and I used to observe him when he would speak to suicidal callers. And he would just be human. He would just start asking them questions like, what's your favorite music, your movies, just to talk to them and keep their mind off of what it was that they called for originally. So I did the same thing. But what I did, though, and what this person didn't know at the time, was that a few months before this call, I was dealing with some excruciating back pain and neck pain and shoulder pain, pain to the point where, and I'm sure it was all stress induced, but
Hmm.
um it was pain to the point where it was going up into my temple and my eyeball, and it was just horrible. It was bad. I would go to the doctor, and they didn't know what to do for me, really.
Hmm.
So the one thing that I did, and it was something that I was nervous about doing only because I was concerned that someone was going to make fun of me if I did it wrong,
Hmm.
and that was yoga. Believe it or not, it was yoga. And I finally practiced yoga. One session of it, the pain was gone,
Wow.
and I continued to practice it. So during this call, I took a shot, and I told her, this is what I did. And I was talking to her about it. I was telling her that I had been dealing with the same type of pain. EMS gets out there, and she ends up saying to me, thank you. I no longer want to kill myself because I now have another pathway, another avenue that I can try, that I can take. And for all I know, she is a yoga instructor somewhere. I don't know, but
Yeah.
but whenever I practice yoga, I think of that person,
Hmm.
because I still have that connection,
And she
and
of
I
you,
always will.
yeah, and she of you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that brings me to a question.
Mhm.
In the training to be a 911 operator, do they cover that? What to say when you get a call like that?
So I'll let me tell you what it was like when I very first started. So this is 2001,
Hmm.
and I go in for, and actually, let's start in the beginning. When I went in for the interview, I sat down with the chief and the lieutenant. We went through the whole thing, but I didn't hear from them for about 2 months. And I
Mm,
thought, "Oh, I guess I didn't get the job." I was
right.
19 at the time. And I end up 2 months later, my grandmother comes into the room where I'm at, and she starts kind of yelling at me in Spanish, and she's saying, "The police are here. The police are here. What did you do?" And I said, "What?" And I said, "I didn't do anything." And she goes, "You need to go see what is going on because they're outside." Now, this city was small enough, everybody knew the chief knew everyone, and I
This was
only
Central
lived,
Florida.
yeah, this is Central Florida
Okay.
now. And I only lived maybe 5 minutes from the police department. So it's the chief. And I walk outside and I say hello to the chief. I'm like, "What are you doing here?" And he goes, "Well, I just wanted to see if you still wanted the job." And I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "But it's been a couple months. I didn't think that I got this." And he goes, "No," he goes, "the background check takes forever, but, we really like you and we want you to come and work for us." Now, a lot of times with jobs, you think, "Well, maybe I'll start on Monday, the following week."
Hmm.
So I asked him this and he goes, "No, you start tonight."
Oh boy.
Yes, yeah, exactly, and I thought the same thing, and I
Mm.
said, "Really?" And he goes, "You want the job, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yes, I do. I wasn't I didn't know that it was gonna be this fast." So I went in that night from 10 PM to 6 AM. I was on a midnight shift. I walk in, my trainer shows me everything, and a 911 call comes in. I observe him. I am in awe of this gentleman who is taking this call because I only have, Rescue 911, a TV show that William Shatner hosted. That was my,
To base your impression of the job, yeah. Wow.
right, yes.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I had other than, retail management experience was all I was coming in with. So,
Mm.
I observe him do this or take this call rather, and then when the call's over, he turns and looks at me and he goes, "Okay, you're next." And I said, "What? There's nothing else to this?" And he goes, "There is." He goes, "But the only way you're really gonna learn is if you're doing it and you're
Mm.
learning on the job." And so I was freaked out that I was gonna be taking that call, but what he told me was that, it takes thick skin, it takes common sense, and you have to be human. So those have always stuck with me. I've always
Right.
told people that, but I was sweating, waiting for that first call to come in that
Mm.
night, and when it did, it was a misdial. It was it was just a butt dial. The person didn't even mean to call 911,
Oh
and
boy.
then
Okay.
yeah, so the following week, I did end up having a 40-hour beginner's course
Okay.
where we ran through different scenarios, what it was going to be like, but this is 2001, so even in 2001, um, the technology wasn't the greatest. It's not like on TV when, you see somebody call in and they pinpoint them their exact location on the map. It doesn't work that way.
Hmm.
Even now, there's a lot of things that can do similar things, but it's not always as accurate as you would see on TV. So
Right.
that's not always like that. But with the mental health part of it, there wasn't really resources there, especially for dispatch. You really didn't talk about it. So
Mm.
we would take calls and then you're just kind of left to how are you going to take care of yourself? There wasn't a lot of talk about that. And I'm not sure why, I mean, of course, people don't want to look weak, right? You don't want someone to think, "Oh, this person can't hack it. They can't do the job or whichever. Do we have to be worried about them or, anything like that?" So people just bury those calls. They bury their emotion, which wasn't or isn't the best thing to do.
Hmm.
So, in the beginning, my first day, and I've spoken to a lot of dispatchers over the years, and it seems to be the same, almost the same with everyone, where my first day off of training, the first day I was going to be by myself is when it hit the fan. But as a 911 dispatcher, you think that first big emergency is going to be on the phone, right? Because that's what the job is. Not for me. It was face to face.
Oh boy.
So the chief is getting ready to leave. And he goes, "You think you got this?" And I kind of chuckled at him and I said, "Look, I've got you. Okay. Don't worry about it. Besides, you listen to the scanner all the time. So if you hear anything, I know you're going to come back because you just live down the road." And he just kind of laughed and he goes, "Okay, okay, you know me well." And I said, "Yeah, it'll be fine." I said, "Don't worry about it, or I will call you." I said, "But you've trained me well." So the small police department, people could walk into the police department and make a complaint there. They walk in, it's the lobby. On the other side is me. And then down the hallway is where, the officers' lockers and everybody else would be, some offices and such. And we hear a car screech up. Door opens. There's a lady screaming. And She opens the door to the police department and runs in, and she's yelling, "I found him. I found him. I found him." And immediately I'm, wow, like this is as real as it gets. My first emergency is not over the phone. It's right here in my face.
Wow.
The chief turns around and again, small town, knows everyone, everyone knows him. And she's just, kind of just hysterical, right? Because she's yelling that she had just found somebody. So
Mhm.
he kind of grabs her by the arms a little and says, "What is going on?" Calls her by her name, says, "What is going on? What is going on?" What happened was her and her husband were separated, and they were trying to figure out whether they wanted to continue their marriage or not. And she decided yes, that she wanted to do so. So she went home to tell her husband that she wanted to make it work. And when she got there, she found him and he had hung himself.
Oh boy.
So the chief and everyone was already headed over there to assist what was going on. And she's sitting in the lobby there with me.
Mm.
So what do, right? You be human. And I go around in the front where she's at, and I ask her if there's anyone that she needs me to call. And she asked me to call some family for her. So they're sitting there with her, and eventually they end up leaving. And the officers come back, and the chief as well. Now, one of the big things in dispatch is we don't get closure. And a lot of times it just sticks in our head. What happened? What happened? What happened? Officers, EMS, fire, they're out there on the scene. They see what is going on. They know the rest of the story. But we start the call and we're with them to the moment that somebody arrives. And then sometimes we have no idea what
Mm.
happens. So I knew what happened, right? I knew what was going on, but there was still something that was bothering me. How else did this person get to this spot? And I wanted to ask one of the officers, but I didn't know just how to say it, right? So then I notice that the officer is holding on to the note. So I keep trying to glance over at it just to see
The note from the
what he
husband?
said. Right, from the
Yeah.
husband, the
Mhm.
suicide note.
Uh-huh.
And he asked me if I wanted to read it. And I said yes. And basically, what it said was that he could no longer live because he couldn't live without his wife or their kids. And all he wanted was for them to be able to continue their marriage.
Mm.
He wanted the same thing. And every time I tell this story and I think about it, I always think, man, if you could have waited just a little bit longer, we might not be having this conversation right now.
Yeah.
But that was the first one that
So
that I had.
she was going there to reconcile with him.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. Isn't that sad? Yeah. Just a few minutes difference. Yeah. Wow. So you guys have to deal with all that stuff all the time. And I was going to
Mhm.
ask you, you mentioned about the officer offering to have you read the note. Do
Mhm.
you, whether it be Central Florida or Michigan, do you interact with the officers or the EMT guys at all to try and
It
get some closure, or just, you know?
If we have some time, yes. There's in the book on page 39, that's one of my stories as well. And it has to do with an infant CPR call. Now, this one was one that really messed me up. And the issue with it was I needed to know that I had done everything in my power for the folks that I was talking to.
Right.
And I remember after I was done with the call, I'd gone through CPR with the mom, and it didn't help. I mean, the infant was already blue in the face. We asked people, is the person beyond CPR help, or do you want to try anyway? And we have our protocols and we go through them, and the mom wanted to try either way. So we're going through and we're going through and going through, because you never know, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, it's not just what we're supposed to do, but you never know. And there are some people who will say, or who have said to me on the phone, no, I don't want to try. I don't want to keep going. I don't want to continue doing this. Just please send us somebody over here. I'm like, okay, and we already have help going that way. But with this specific call, mom wanted to do CPR. So I'm going through CPR with them. I'm calm, cool, and collected, but in the back of my head, I'm thinking about my kids too.
Hmm.
What if this is me?
Sure.
So as empaths, we put ourselves in the caller's shoes to be able to relate and, build that trust and everything, that rapport with the caller, so that they can answer the questions that we need for the help that's going out their way as fast as possible. And I get off the phone once EMS gets out there, right? And my supervisor to my right, she says, "Hey," and I turn and look at her, and she goes, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm okay." But that was BS. I was not okay.
Hmm.
It messed me up, because
Right.
one of the things that ended up happening was that a few officers were called out there, and they just went out there to make sure, that there wasn't any, foul play or anything like that. And there wasn't anything like that. But to me, because I can't see what's going on, when these calls come in, I'm putting all of this together in my head as
Right.
different puzzle pieces to illustrate what it is that is going on, so that those who are responding know exactly what it is that they're dealing with. And sometimes what we put together in our minds is worse than what it is that's actually going on there.
Sure.
But with this one, I didn't know anything else. So I'm sitting there, and EMS and fire, what they'll do is, after some of those runs that they go on, they'll call up and they'll ask for their times and the number of the complaint. Well, they asked for the person who took the call, and that was me. And so they put him on hold, and the person who was there, one of my partners, goes, "Ricardo, EMS wants to talk to you about that call." And I remember sitting there, and I just came back to me now. I just remember sitting there and just taking a big, deep breath and thinking, okay, here we go. Maybe I'm going to find out what happened. I get on the phone, and immediately EMS says, "I want you to know that when we got there, they were doing textbook CPR. You did a great job, as well as them. I'm sorry that the outcome wasn't the outcome that we would all have wanted, but there was nothing more that you could have done to change the outcome.
Mm.
Just remember that." And that alone made me feel better, but it was still in the back of my head. Why were the officers out there? Why did they need to go out there? So my supervisor, her husband was one of the sergeants that was out there, and she told him to come up. And luckily, I had a moment where there wasn't a lot on my side that was going on. So he walks in, sits right next to me, and he goes, "What do you want to know? Let me know." And I said, "Everything. I need to know what happened." And he told me everything that had happened. And after that, I felt better.
Hmm.
But it was that closure that I needed. And I needed to know that I had done everything that I could have, because a lot of times when you're taking these calls, depending on the outcome or whichever, you start kind of blaming yourself in a way. Like, was there something else I could have done?
Right.
Is there anything I could have done over
Something
the
you didn't think
phone?
of at the time. Yeah.
Right. Minus getting out of going through the phone, to
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
help them yourself. Is there anything else? And sometimes that eats at you.
Hmm.
So I was happy that I had the opportunity to have both of these folks tell me exactly what happened, but also that I did everything that I could have.
Right. And in dealing with other 911 operators, is that common? That
Yeah.
lack of sense of closure? Or,
Yes.
yeah.
That's one of the biggest things, is that lack of closure.
Hmm.
It is always good when we have the chance, right? Like I did, to have EMS or one of the officers tell me what had happened. But there's a lot of times, the majority of those, especially for my calls as well, where I didn't have that closure, where
Mm,
I'm going home after a hard night of just crap call after crap call. And for me, I lived about 40, 45 minutes away from the dispatch center.
mhm,
So that's a long time
mhm.
to be with my thoughts.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I would drive in silence.
Mm,
And a lot of that would replay in my head and replay in my head. And I would get home. And I remember with that call specifically, when I got home, I think I was even on an overtime shift, but when I got home, I saw my son. He's 19 now, but at the time he was, I think maybe 4, 3.5, 4 years old. And I remember hugging him and I hugged him tight. And I hugged him tight enough that I remember hearing him kind of wince a little bit.
mhm,
and
mm,
and he's like, "What's wrong? What, are you okay?" And I said, I love you so much."
mm.
And because you start to think about that family doesn't have that child anymore.
Right.
And it really puts life into perspective in a lot of ways and
Mhm,
allows you to appreciate more of everything that you have.
mhm. Did you find some nights that 45 minutes was good to bleed off the? Because I'm sure there's adrenaline involved sometimes in your
Mhm.
job too.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of times too, those pains that I was telling you about, because we sit for 12 hours, sometimes 16. And again, my longest shift ever sitting in dispatch was 18 hours.
Wow.
And you get up, you walk around or whichever, but you don't realize how tensed up you are until that adrenaline dump, and then everything else starts coming in.
Mm,
So you're going and going and going and going, and then I get in the car, and if I throw music on or if I'm just there in silence, oh, okay, there's that back pain. I must have been sitting like this, or like I still have problems with my shoulders sometimes because even though we had headsets, there were some times that those headsets weren't working. So I'm picking up a handset and I'm like this,
mm.
with my head to the side, holding onto the
And you
phone,
don't even realize it.
typing.
Yeah.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
and when I ended up leaving dispatch to do everything that I'm doing now, I remember going to the chiropractor because my body felt like it started falling apart,
Mm,
and I go to the chiropractor, and he gives me this X-ray, and because he just wanted to see what he was gonna be working with, and he goes, Mr. Martinez, can you come over here a moment? I want you to look at this." And I said, Okay, you're freaking me out already." And he goes, "No, it's kind of funny. I don't know." And I said, "Okay, are we gonna laugh about this?" So I go around, right, and I look at the X-ray, and in the X-ray, I am like this with my head to the right.
oh my. Yeah.
Yes, like
Yeah.
that's how it was. And he goes, "We're gonna fix that." He goes, "How long have you been that way?" And I said, a long time." So I tell people now when I do different keynotes, public speaking, I'm going to public safety conferences, and I start talking about some of those issues.
Mhm.
I tell people, make sure you listen to your body because otherwise, eventually, your body is going to make you listen, whether you want to or not,
Right.
and you're going to have to come back from it somehow.
Right. Um, and also in talking to some of the other dispatchers and 911 operators you've dealt with,
Mhm,
is there a common problem? I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but
mhm.
bringing home the job, how
You
it
know,
might affect the family life when they do get off shift.
so there are a lot of people who are able to leave it
Hmm.
there, right? I was one of those who would say that. So there are some who can, there's some who say it, and there's some that, they're dealing with it. So for me, I thought that I was leaving it at work, but that was BS as well because I would come home and I was distant.
Hmm.
It's so loud in there sometimes that when you come home and you've got your family who's talking to you or the kids want to play or whatever, like I'm playing and I'm there, but I'm not fully there because I still have everything from work going on. So I'm also dealing with what I call dispatch ear, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And what I mean by that is, for dispatch ear, you're listening to everything in the room. So if I'm taking a phone call, let's say a 911 call comes in and it's just an open line, there's nobody there talking. So I'm just listening to what's going on within the environment of that phone call, but also at the same time, listening to everything that's going on in the room, whether it be my partners, the radio, EMS, fire, police, all of it all at the same time.
Mm,
So then when I go home, it's the same way. I'm playing with my kids. I can hear the TV that's going on. I can hear people outside. I hear my wife talking on the phone. I smell the food that's cooking, and then I snap back to what it is that I'm playing, with my kids or whatever, and all of it is on.
mm,
Or sometimes I'm just kind of sitting on the couch, just trying to gather my thoughts because it's been such a crazy shift.
sure.
And
Do you
even
bring that up when you're public speaking to other dispatchers?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talk about that, and a lot of people have said it. So, there's actually another thing that I did, and, it was actually something that I was talking to my wife about, and it's another hashtag, but it's called "If I Could Tell You One Thing," and it has to do with dispatch or public safety because a lot of people ended up sending those. And for example, it was, if I could tell you one thing, it would be that when I get home and I am short with you, it's not because I don't want to hear from you, but it's because I've been talking all day and I'm trying to gather myself. So a lot of these have been posted out there for friends and family to read
Right.
so that their family members or friends that they have that are in public safety, if they're talking to them and they're, kind of off or whatever, they know why. They
Right.
know that there's an issue or something. So there are a lot of folks who end up dealing with this where they take it home, but there are some that are able to leave it at work. And I
Mhm.
think now that because we're having all of these conversations and that there's more resources out there, there are more people who are able to heal, gain closure through the power of storytelling and
Mhm.
conversation. But also a lot of folks, going to therapy too. There's nothing wrong with it. People are getting the help that they need and
Mhm.
they're thriving instead of just surviving in this profession, this career.
Right.
And a lot of people are doing very well.
That's I'm glad to hear that.
Mhm.
And I'm sure a lot of fellow dispatchers and 911 operators would love to get this book. I certainly appreciate you coming. How did it turn out with the movement? Did you, I mean, you moved to the next I forgot what the terminology was. You wanted to move from one get the dispatches moved from one classification to the next.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So for the reclassification issue that's been going on, we're still fighting
Okay.
it.
Now,
So
how does that get to that point? Like, what needs to be done?
so what needs to happen really is convincing the Office of Management and Budget to just switch that reclassification. But
Is
there are
this a
so many.
federal
It's a federal
designation?
thing.
I
Yes,
see.
it's a
Okay.
federal. Yeah, it's a federal designation, and all of that moves very slow. One of the good things, though, is the fact that one of the congresswomen, her name is Congresswoman Norma Torres. She was actually a dispatcher for
Oh.
about 17, 18 years with a police department out of Los Angeles, LAPD.
Mm-hmm.
So we have one of our own who has been fighting this as well. I've had her on the podcast to talk about all of this. I visited her, and so the fight continues.
Right.
And there's actually individual states who have either redefined the definition of what a first responder is to include 911 dispatchers, or they've not only done that, but they've also reclassified at the state level. But what they're trying to do is do it at the federal level. And because it didn't pass the first time, we have to wait. I think it's like 10 years. Every 10 years,
You kidding?
they no, every 10 years they redesignate, but they're already working on different things because one of the big things is, job descriptions. It's not
Mm-hmm.
just stories that they're looking for, right? It's, they need hard data. They're looking at the job descriptions. And if a job description is seems to be more clerical than protective, I guess, in a way. Then I guess that's why it maybe didn't pass. Like that was just one of the pieces, right? There was way more to it, but that's one of the things that 911 is working on right now is changing those job descriptions because the job isn't what it was when this started in 1968, that very
Right.
first 911 call. It wasn't just answering the phone and sending one out. Now 911 dispatchers are doing all kinds of thing, investigative work. You're trying to pinpoint people where they're at exactly. You're a therapist as well. You're all kinds of different things all
Right.
wrapped up into one.
Hmm.
So
And what is the benefit of the reclassification to the dispatcher?
So, from what I know, a lot of what the benefits come with is, different retirement benefits.
I see.
Also, the possibility of getting more funds to the dispatch centers so that they can have more training or more mental health and wellness. There's a lot of different things that go into it. Right now, it's for that recognition of having 911 dispatchers in the protective class to be designated as a first responder, and the rest of those benefits end up coming out years after.
Right. But because
There's
of the reclassification.
Yes, right,
Yes,
because of
I
that
understand.
reclassification. Mhm.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to read the book. Just ordered it, so it'll be here, I'm sure. Amazon is walking down the block with it now. How fast
Yeah.
they are! But I certainly wish you much success with it. It sounds so enthralling. I really, honestly, can't wait to read it. And what's the name of the podcast again?
The podcast name is Within the Trenches: True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them.
Yes, I checked a few of the episodes out this afternoon in preparation for this podcast, and I found it extraordinarily interesting. You have some very interesting guests. You had that that police captain on
Oh,
recently.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes, Sheriff Judd. He it
yeah,
was,
I've seen
just
him
an
on the
amazing
news.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's a high profile sheriff. Yeah,
Yes, he is,
so.
definitely, yeah.
But I certainly appreciate your time tonight, and I wish you all success with the book.
Thank you.
And you'll see my review on Amazon as soon as I read it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I
And hopefully
appreciate it.
we'll talk again when you come out with part two.
All right. I am all about it. Thank you so
And that's
much.
and that's Ricardo Martinez, and the name of the book is Imagine Listening. Your worst day is our every day. You'll find the link to his Amazon page right below the show notes. Thank you, sir, for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an honor.